Matthew 24. There was an awful lot here. I'm just going to go through this line by line and share what I've learned about this topic. And I'm very much open to either other interpretations of it or correction if need be, because I'm by no means a pastor or trained scholar here. Again, I'm just a guy reading his Bible and trying to understand it the best I can. So right at the beginning of verse 24, we see Jesus talking about the temple, saying, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be here one stone left upon another that will not be thrown down." This was fulfilled in 70 AD upon the destruction of the Jewish temple. And not one stone was left on the other. From what I've read, there was gold inlays between each brick, and those were taken apart to take the gold out. Not one stone left upon the other. Now, starting at verse 3, we need to take note that he's speaking to the disciples directly, not a crowd of people. This is important to understand because when Christ says the word "you," we need to know who "you" is referring to. And in this case here, it is the disciples, unless it says otherwise. So the first question at the beginning of this discourse is, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" It is very well documented that there were a mass amount of false prophets and false Christs during this time, up until, well, really even into the modern day. But at this time, there were numerous false prophets and people claiming to be Christ after his death and resurrection. Jesus gives clear warning of this. "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars." At first glance, wars and rumors of wars doesn't sound all that impressive to us, but at that time, that was during the Pax Romana. It was a time of peace because Rome ruled with an iron fist and no uprisings were allowed. So for the people of that time, hearing that there would be wars and rumors of wars sounded a bit unheard of. Jesus continues here saying, "Do not be alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains." If one goes back and reads the early writings of Josephus and other outside Bible sources, you'll find that the famine and earthquake line is very understated here in a lot of ways. The famine was so severe that people were killing each other and cutting open their stomachs to take food from the dead. This famine was severe and lasted the full 7 years from 63 AD up until Jerusalem's destruction by Titus in 70 AD. This is a part 2, so if you haven't listened to the first part, go back and take a listen. So here we're continuing on in Matthew 24, starting at verse 9. Again, I want to make note that Jesus is speaking to the disciples here. So whenever you hear the word "you," unless it says otherwise, that's who it's referring to as the disciples. So in verse 9, Jesus says, "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake." If you've read anything about how the lives of the disciples ended, including Paul, you'll find that it didn't end very peacefully. All of them were put to death, if I'm not mistaken, with the exception of John, who lived in exile on Patmos, but was boiled alive at one point, but survived it. Again, here Jesus reiterates the false prophets and the people leading those astray who are part of the big movement that is happening here and that will grow much larger after his death and resurrection. Starting at verse 10, "And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end will be saved." What is important to note here is he's talking to the disciples. So if we read this as a modern day thing, something that's happening right now, we're doing a disservice to reading the text here, because Jesus is directing this to the disciples and telling them what's going to be happening to them. So once we get to verse 14, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." So it's very clear here that the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed through the whole world before the end will come. Jesus' kingdom will continue to be built until God the Father deems it time for him to return in his glory. Now as we move into verses 15 through 21, we get into some verses that have some multiple interpretations by numerous amounts of people. But here's what I believe, and here's what, through my study, I'm going to read you a commentary here that I wholly agree with. Although some interpreters take this passage to refer exclusively to the second coming, there are unmistakable references to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, as is clear from the parallel account in Luke 21:20 through 24. The destruction of Jerusalem, its house left desolate, which Jesus just lamented in Matthew 23:38, is a foretaste of the last judgment, and so is a sign of the coming wrath. It stands as a unique declaration of the end of the old age, and so is a specific and uniquely important sign. End of the old age, which we just read previously in verse 14 here. We will get deeper into this section in part 3. This is a part 3, so if you haven't watched the first 2, go back and listen to those. So here we're going to take a look at Matthew 24:15 through 21. Again, I want to make note that Jesus is speaking to the disciples directly here. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, which I would note is not let the reader of this gospel understand, let the reader of Daniel understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go back down to take what is in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for the women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not has been from the beginning of the world until now, nor will ever be. So again, I'm going to read you a commentary here talking about the abomination of desolation in relation to Daniel, as well as the Roman takeover and destruction of Jerusalem. In Daniel 9:27 and 11:31, the phrase refers to the desecration of the temple of by the Syrian ruler Antiochus IV Epiphanes, probably pronouncing that wrong, in 168 BC. Antiochus erected a pagan altar in the temple. According to Josephus, he also sacrificed swine there. Shortly before AD 70, the Zealots entered the temple precincts during the war with Rome, and their presence could have been considered a desecration. In AD 70, the Romans entered the temple with military standards, ceremonial insignia, that were elements of their religion. Reliefs of the Ark of Titus in Rome show Roman troops removing the temple's sacred vessels, including the lampstand, after which they burned the temple down. There are many that believe that a third temple has to be built to fulfill this prophecy that Jesus spoke of right here, but it already happened in AD 70. That's one reason I've been pointing out that he's speaking to the disciples here, because the disciples experienced this. Not all of them, some of them had been killed, but many of them witnessed these events. The early church historian Eusebius recorded these events and the fleeing of Jerusalem during the Jewish war, which is in perfect line with this prophecy. I'm going to pause this series here and recommend that you go take a listen to Jeff Durbin's teaching on this topic, which is very thorough and expansive. It is on YouTube on Apologia Studios. He does a much better job of laying this all out and tying in scriptures that I've not mentioned here back and forth. Time, of course, is of the essence in these short 3-minute videos. I would challenge you to question your traditions and really take this to heart.